Hello, everybody, and happy Halloween. Welcome back to our final Scoobtober video for 2023. So, we've got a really exciting one. We're going to be reviewing in retrospective style Scooby Doo and the Witch's Ghost, which I don't know if this is a spoiler, but this is one of my favorites. Now, this will be breaking the formula in that we're not going to have an interview announcement at the end of this one as such. But I do want to point out that we've done multiple Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost interviews that you can watch right now and indeed after this review, including with Jennifer Hale, the voice of Thorn, and the writers. We've got David Goodman and Rick Kopp, and there's a whole playlist I'm going to make after this of Witch's Ghost interviews, so please be sure to check them out in the description down below. Millie.
Yeah, so like you were saying, one of the Hex Girls, we can't forget that this is the introduction of them, but we will get onto that in a few minutes. So I guess, this movie has, to me, what's one of the most iconic opens. I know whenever I see a cold open, I'm always like, oh yeah, this is, and like where an opening where it's kind of finishing off another mystery. I'm like, oh yeah, like the Witch's Ghost. So I don't know, to me, this has always been quite an impactful start to the movie. We join a mystery kind of part way through, and to have the Scooby Doo Where Are You song playing as well. To me, I don't think there's much more of a better way to start off a Scooby Doo movie, if I'm honest. JayBee, what do you think?
Well, we got Billy Ray on the track, which is pretty cool. I don't know how mainstream he was back then, but I think he does a pretty good job here. Like, obviously, me being me, my favorite's always going to be Jennifer Love Hewitt's rendition, but I like Billy Ray a lot, and he gives a nice little tone going into it. So, yeah, it is what it is. I don't think it's a particularly spectacular cold open. It just does exactly what it needs to do. And yeah, I like it for that reason.
One of the reasons I like it as well, though, is it's quite a slow opening. Like, I think if you compare this with the last movie we reviewed that was very quick and very this place, and this place all at once, they take their time to show Velma hiding in plain sight, Fred and Daphne, and integrated into her background, Shaggy and Scooby. They're not in a rush to get into this movie. Almost seems to have quite a gentle start, but I do really enjoy it. Dan, how do you feel about the start of the movie?
Yeah, no, I've always loved this opening. I think it's actually quite creepy. I think like when you see the professor just slowly walking through the museum, and then I don't know what the two creatures are meant to be, the ones with the axes, but I thought they were genuinely quite scary. Um, yeah, no, I liked how in these films with Zombie Island and Alien Invaders and stuff, they had like a different person singing the Scooby Doo theme song. I don't think Billy Ray Cyrus is my favorite, but it was pretty good. And I also like how this cold open it does actually. I mean, obviously it doesn't relate to the Witch's Ghost, but it does factor in. Like, obviously we find out later on there was a reason that this whole mystery was happening, and so I always found that really cool because normally with these cold opens, that's it. Like with the moat monster and stuff, it doesn't usually come back, but this one did towards the end, so I like that.
I like what you're saying as well. I agree. The villains for this are particularly quite scary looking, really. I was kind of thinking when we were watching this back, it's almost like they give themselves double the work because they have to think of double the villains to feature. And with ones like this, I'd have been happy to see an entire movie just about them. Sophie, how did you feel about the start of the movie?
I think any Scooby that starts near the end of a mystery is quite captivating, and I think it definitely sold me on that. The atmosphere created is quite eerie, and the villain, they're very menacing looking, so it really sets you up for the movie. So yeah, it's a good cold opening.
I think so. And I want to get onto the style of the characters in this movie because I know this look isn't for everybody. Some people like it, some people don't, but it is that kind of zombie island look. Certainly, I always think of it as they've aged 5 years from the typical Scooby we see. They always look quite a bit older, I think, in this style. I don't know if there's ever been kind of some confirmed theory about that, but I don't hate the look. I just associate it with them being a little bit older. But Sophie, I know you definitely kind of study how the gang look and the variations. So what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, with all these four movies, the artwork is incredible in them. I definitely get a more mature tone to it, which I kind of enjoy. I know Scooby's like a kids franchise, but it works for both adult and child friendly. I felt like in Zombie Island it was a bit more bright and a bit more muted, and this one's quite a dull contrast, with more of electric colours with it. And I think it has more of a creepy feeling than Zombie Island for me personally, which I really like.
I do think this one has quite a specific colour palette, for like once you get to Oakhaven and things like that as well, it's quite a distinct colour palette that I think, I can't remember what movie it was we were watching recently, but there certainly was a Scooby movie where I was like, it was an episode, wasn't it, JayBee? I think there was an episode of Guess Who where it used quite a similar colour palette for when it was flashbacks, kind of like a wartime thing.
Oh, it was the one with the effing Fanta.
Yes. And it's kind of like they'd use the colour palette. I think it is quite distinct. JayBee, Dan, do you have anything to add about the style of the gang in this one or the colour palettes or anything?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the same as in Zombie Island. This is one of my favorite Daphne looks. I absolutely love her in that purple suit. I love the way they sort of had her shirt underneath be green, so it sort of looked like obviously original with the ascot, and also Fred. I love Fred's outfit in the last one and in this one. I think obviously with where they were going with them two characters, they couldn't just wear the the normal outfits with the ascots and the shirt and the scarves. So I think they did a really good job sort of bringing those two into the more modern times. And I don't know, I always got the feeling, I know you're saying about them being about 5 years older, I always pictured them as about 30 in these films. Like just with Daphne, obviously, in the last one had like a syndicated talk show and stuff. I always pictured them in their 30s.
Yeah, I definitely don't think you can see them as the same age as the gang, but I also think it kind of fits well because with the movies where they do this look, the stakes are a bit higher, like the zombies are real, it's a real witch, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting to have this array of opinions because I'll be honest, I kind of hate these, like obviously they don't change Shaggy, they don't change Scooby, they don't change Velma, so they're cool. And I don't know, it's just this version of Daphne and Fred. Like I'm not a completely purist, but I definitely do dislike these designs quite a bit. I don't know what it is. I don't know what, but I've just never read. They've never resonated with me, and it's a shame because I remember when they flashed back to the moat monster in Zombie Island, they gave us a look at those classic designs, and I actually think they do enough there where I think they could have told the stories that they could have told, that they end up telling with those classic designs because I think they toned down a lot of it, and it just fits with the style. I'm not thinking that looks a bit goofy or that looks right out of 1969. I think they do enough to modernize it in terms of the Mook art style, but it's not a deal breaker. I can appreciate what these stories do. It's just I'd always be curious to see some type of version when they're in their classic designs.
Okay, I mean, I can't agree with you in that you say you don't like the styles. I must admit I do like them and think that it's a very natural progression of if you were to age those characters up, probably what they'd look like. So I think it's a fair representation. But like we said, this is a style that does split some people. So I guess kind of getting a bit more into the episode, like we said, there is a mystery that's kind of in the middle when we start. And as the unmasking happens, we are introduced to Ben Ravencroft, who is like the central character of the movie. So JayBee, I believe you've said there's kind of some parallels between him, Stephen King, that sort of thing. So I'm going to go to you first as a big Stephen King fan. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, he's all right. Like, I think if it was, I think the thing that makes it cool in hindsight, at least at the start, is that we've got Tim Curry giving a great Tim Curry performance, and the design is excellent as well. There's obviously a lot of kind of visual callbacks to, I think it was 80s Stephen King, or I think 80s Stephen King, but yeah, I think it's great. And to have Velma completely obsessed with him. It makes completely perfect sense when you've got Velma as an academic, as a bookworm, and of course she's gonna go completely crazy at the sight of this famous mystery horror author. It's a match made in heaven, really. So I'm really grateful for that. I think where it ends up going, it's a bit like I don't know if that's entirely plausible. Like, obviously, because he concocted it all. I think with Velma being such a big fan, all he'd need to do is drop her an email and say, "Hey, you're mystery solvers. Will you help me out here?" And mystery off. But if it's this mystery build up to get to where we would have went anyway, I'm glad that they went with the more interesting options. So yeah, I think he's good here.
Okay. Brilliant. And Sophie, Dan, do either of you have any thoughts on kind of the introduction of Ben Ravencroft or his character or anything?
Yeah, I think he's one of my favorite Scooby Doo characters, like introduced in one of the films. I think the performance obviously helps. I'm a big Stephen King fan, and I actually quite like. I actually don't mind Velma in this one purely because she acts pretty much like how I would. if I met a celebrity I liked, and especially if I was, invited back to like where he lives and stuff. So I think he really helps sort of almost humanize Velma in this one. Like she's still smart, she's still that, but we see I like a sort of more human side to her, which I like. So yeah, no, I like Ben Ravencroft. I think it's one of my favorite Tim Curry performances, to be honest. And yeah, it's easy enough as well to look back and say, oh, he was obviously going to be the villain. But I remember the time when I first ever watched this as a child, I remember being like genuinely shocked that he was evil, and I felt really bad for Velma.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I genuinely felt pretty shocked as well with the reveal, especially when you see that portrait and it's kind of like, oh, well, surely at this point you'd kind of be picking up on something, and there just was nothing to pick up on. But Sophie, what's your thoughts on Ben Ravencroft?
Definitely how he was introduced was like quite good, as a main character within this plot. Like you say, I think Tim Curry was like the perfect fit for this character. Like the performance is completely sold by him playing it. And I mean, I know we'll get more into him as the movie goes on, but yeah, I had a good first impression from him, and then
Yeah, certainly the opinion starts to go downhill a little bit after the next half an hour or so, but for now he's a good character. I think, like you say, it certainly facilitates a good side of Velma. We get to see a different side of her character, which is always nice. A lot more, like you say, kind of emotions based of something she enjoys instead of just trying to tell us stuff about logic and facts, which is always good to see. So like we said, from that introduction, they get invited back to Oakhaven, where they meet the mayor. You kind of get the scene that it's a bit of kind of like a tourist attraction been played upon the appearance of the Witch of Sarah Ravencroft, and kind of we start to see all the t-shirts and stuff affiliated with that. And I guess it's certainly a good plot for the mystery to be familiar with what the ghost is, but also kind of wanting to see what they can do with that, if you understand, JayBee.
I think when it connects, I think it's stakes at the end of the day, and it's connectability. If you can buy that this Ben Ravencroft geezer is someone with either one, good intentions, or if you connected enough to the character of Velma to care that at least she believes that he's a person of good intentions, that they wish that they can help. I think it's a good idea to make it a personal story for him. Because either one, you like the guy and you want him to at least have his ancestor get exonerated from all of these, wrong accusations, or you want that for Velma. So I think it's a good idea to tie it to a personal story, because I think that's one thing that some of the more modern Scoobies are lacking. It's always, we need to help someone that we're just being introduced to, that we're just kind of, we don't know what to think about them, and we have to help them out or something. So that's why I always like it when we're helping out either a relative of the gang or someone that's built up as a likable character. So I mean, yes, a good catalyst for a mystery. I think ultimately the setup, I don't know if I prefer it. I think it's definitely less interesting than, say, Zombie Island, where it's Daphne's actually going out to look for a real ghost, but by making it a bit more personal. And I think it's a lot smaller scale than Zombie Island when you think about it, but I think it does well with that intimate setting of Oakhaven. So I think it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting.
I certainly think it's more of a complex story than normal, because it's not just who's the man behind the mask. It's also, he makes clear early on he wants to find the book and that her journal will prove her innocence and stuff like that. So you kind of have this tale of, they're saying that her ghost's there, but also he's saying that she's innocent. And so you're a bit more invested in just than who's the ghost, but also what's kind of the truth on both sides there. I guess if you can remember back to the first time you saw it, I know I certainly was leaning on the way side of like, oh yeah, she's definitely got to be innocent. There's all these flashbacks. It seems so like she's going to be nice, and I fully was on that side of the fence. Dan, do you remember the first time you saw it and what your thoughts were on that kind of divide?
Yeah, it's funny. I can remember so vividly. I remember being around a friend's house and they had the VHS, and I was a big fan like of Zombie Island at that point. So I remember watching it for the first time, and yeah, I don't think it ever really occurred to me that Sarah would turn out to be like a bad person. Like, I don't know, because the film doesn't really play that up, and it's like you say, it's different from Zombie Island. Zombie Island, obviously, they keep on saying they want to know, it has to be a real ghost, and Lena promises there's going to be a real ghost. That's never really a factor at the start of this. Like when they go into it, it's just another mystery. They fully intend to unmask whoever's dressing up as the witch's ghost. Then obviously they do unmask someone. So I remember being quite surprised when obviously the film wasn't over then, and it then goes on and you find out more. But yeah, I think it works well. I like Oakhaven. I love the fact that they have this whole tourist thing, because that to me is just what you would do just to make money. Like, I suppose like in real life you've got Loch Ness, who they obviously heavily promote the fact there's a monster in there. And anywhere where like a famous person's been, or a TV show film there, oftentimes just to help the economy they'll sort of play that up. So I quite like that Oakhaven embraced Sarah Ravencroft as the witch's ghost. And I suppose as well, when a famous author came from there and he was a horror writer, you may as well promote it.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like you said, it's what places do. You do pick up on what was filmed there, what, history they've got. And like you say, it's a big tourist thing. It's how they make money and stuff. So it certainly does make sense for them to have played up on that. And I think you've raised an interesting point as well, that in Zombie Island, it was a big thing. Like, oh, this time the monsters are real. They were here as well, but because there was an unmasking, it also kind of flew under the radar a little bit of how real this one actually is. Sophie, do you remember the first time that you watched it and kind of where you sat on that kind of Sarah Ravencroft witch Wiccan divide sort of thing?
Well, as soon as I entered Oakhaven, the artwork is stunning in that sequence. I think it really adds to the whole story plot. I think it really helps carry the story across. It's definitely a really unique setting. Really good autumn vibe, so that's why it's perfect for Halloween. I will say the fact that we were all kind of fooled by the whole like Sarah story, by this like amazing plot twist at the end, just shows how well they set it up, because none of us were expecting it. I remember I wasn't. I was quite shocked by it. So yeah, I think how they've done it was very cleverly put together.
Yeah, I think it was set up really well. The flashback to her being a Wiccan, the portrait, everything just seemed so sweet and innocent.
It's almost a historical curveball as well when you think about it, because I don't know if it was such a thing back then, but I think we've been conditioned to kind of look back at the past and think about how some things that have happened historically are a bit egregious. So, for instance, there's a woman in the past that has an aptitude for the sciences or biology and something like that, which is very commonplace now. Back then, it would have gone, ha! This witch, let's drown her and see if she's innocent. And so that with those trials, especially going on like here, we've lived right by Pendle Hill. So kind of when you have that knowledge and now you go back and it's, oh, isn't that sad? She was probably just an honest medicine woman that got, falsely accused. And then it's like, oh no, she actually was just a full-blown evil witch. Okay, like, never mind then. So it kind of subverts the expectations from that point of view, which I think is interesting, because when has Scooby ever really lent into something that subverted a historical fact? Unless there were actually real witches that got drowned, but that's another discussion. But I thought that was interesting.
I mean, I know we're skipping ahead, but to me, this was one of the most shocking reveals, because you have this innocent vibe all the way along, and then before you know it, some like notebook with a skull on the front pulled out of a box, and there's a full witch just there. Like, it escalates so quickly in a way that I just don't think any other Scooby does. There's just something about this one that's just completely different for me. But before we get to that part, I think it's fair to say Shaggy and Scooby have lots of restaurant scenes throughout Scooby history, but there's something about this one that makes it memorable. And I don't know quite what it is that they do differently here, but if you say Scooby Doo restaurant scene, this is where my brain goes. Even to like the aftermath as well, when their stomachs are all bloated, they see the Hex Girls and they kind of lift it up to look like muscle and stuff. There's just something about this scene that's so different, but I don't know what the difference is. Anything that stands out to any of you that's kind of maybe why this one's kind of more definitive?
No, I just need to apologize to the audience if my energy seems completely off, because I can't even engage in a conversation about food or eating right now, because I've eaten myself into almost KOing myself today on Halloween candy and such. So I can't even engage in this conversation, but I apologize to the audience if I seem slightly KO'd.
What about Don and Sophie? Is there anything different that you can pinpoint from this restaurant scene that makes it stand out more, or is it just me that is obsessed with this movie and that's why it stands out?
I think I go again to the artwork. I think how they built up the scene with all the food on the table. And there's quite a lot of jokes, and it's quite a funny scene, and that makes it more memorable as well compared to the other ones. Especially the camaraderie between, I can't remember the chef's name, and Shaggy and Scooby.
I
You
think
know,
it's
and the fact that
Jack.
Ben said, you know, he'd pay everything, and therefore Shaggy and Scooby got more, like everything on the menu. So it's quite a funny scene, definitely.
It is funny. And Dan, what about you? Is there anything about that in particular that you enjoy?
Yeah, I love the whole way it plays out. 'Cause obviously, we've had loads of Shaggy and Scooby food jokes over the years, but I think it works so well. I love. So at first when Ben says that anything that orders on them, and then Daphne's like, "Oh, you're going to regret that," and then it's just everything about the fact that initially the owner loves it, and he's like, "Oh, I love people who love to eat," but then it just goes way too far. I love how as well you see like the other customers' reactions and stuff, and they're all just horrified.
Oh yeah.
And then right at the end, where when they're leaving and the poor chef's just left with all the dishes, it's quite realistic in that way, I suppose.
I think it's like as well a bit of comedic relief in what's quite a serious sequence, because they flip between that and the history of Sarah Ravencroft. So you need to keep it entertaining. So they put extra effort into making this bit quite funny. Whereas you also have the flashbacks of Sarah Ravencroft. This is when you get the flashbacks to when she was meant to be a Wiccan and that sort of stuff. So perhaps it's to try and complement that as well. But ultimately, where this scene ends up, like we say, is they meet the Hex Girls. And this is the first introduction of them into the Scoobyverse. And I feel like they're forever going to be a permanent fixture. I think they could genuinely come back at any time, and the audience will be excited to see them again. I guess at this point, we've not heard them sing. We just get a quick flash of them in the alleyway, and then they're going to make a reappearance later with the music. But what's your thoughts? I guess like this is an entire talking point in itself, just that we have the Hex Girls here. I think it's not until we hear them sing that in my mind it's okay, I want them there in every movie. But I think the aesthetics are perfect. I love music, and obviously this I think is the movie where we perhaps see the best Hex Girl songs perhaps ever. So there's, you know, that perhaps is a reason why it got off to such a great success. But JayBee, what's your thoughts on the Hex Girls?
I don't know if this is weird to say in hindsight, but I think like a lot of people, Thorn for me was definitely one of those canon events growing up. You know, there were gothic chips with the swinging hips. Like I was a young boy at that point. It was only going to affect me in one way, but I love how we're introduced to them in somewhat of a low-key way. Like you mentioned, like these are, you know, pop stars, rock stars. It would have made, and actually, if you haven't watched this for a while, you would be forgiven for thinking that their introduction was on the stage, and you'd expect them to be like it was in the Music of the Vampire, Legend of the Vampire. But to have them introduced in such a low-key way in the alleyway, I think it's absolutely amazing. And to imagine that like Scooby Doo icons were born from a relatively low-key scene, I think it's fantastic. I think they did nail it. And for all I think we maybe would have got the same effect if their first scene was on the stage. Just the fact that we get such a subversion of expectations, the humor of Shaggy and Scooby. Yeah, I love it. I think it's Esther.
Yeah, I agree. Sophie, how do you feel about the introduction of the Hex Girls, or just them in general?
I love the low-key like introduction. However, it's quite mysterious, which kind of like fits their vibe, which is like really perfect, like, you know, setting yourself up for it. I know every time the scene comes on, I was like cheering. It's like, yeah, the Hex Girls, like, you know. But yeah, I think how they went about it, even though it was like low key, the fact that it kind of fit their vibes, like being a bit mysterious, and like you don't know if they're bad or good, do you, at the beginning? I mean, you make out that they're bad, but then once, you know, they get to know each other, I just think it's really good, cool. Like it's not like they just bumped into each other in like a room. It's kind of like set up like a mysterious tone to it, which I thought was cool.
I do too, and I think as well something that's just interesting is how these characters have survived in Scooby, because like you say, they're not introduced as the good guys straight away. They're a point of, you know, they're one of the suspects. Thorn gets followed home. They've got vampire fans. It's mentioned in this movie, although I don't think they really pick up on it very much, well, not too much in the future, about Thorn being a Wiccan and stuff like that. Like We've seen characters written out of Scooby for less because they don't like it when it's real. Like when they tried to do the Return of the 13th Ghost, how picky they were about returning certain characters, how things had to be a certain way. So for the Hex Girls to be this way, it's amazing that Warner Brothers allowed them to survive, but it would have been a huge loss if they hadn't.
Well, I don't want to speak out of turn because I haven't seen every single bit of Hex Girls media, surprisingly. Like, I don't think I've actually seen the full episode that they had in Guess Who and stuff like that. So I'm not a Hex Girl expert, but I want to say from memory, this is almost the only movie where the actual characters, because they're suspects, they're treated just like because at this point it's easy to forget, but they didn't know that these were going to become Scooby legends. So as far as this movie is concerned, they're just another suspect, another group of suspects. And so we get introduced to, Thorn's dad. We get a bit of backstory about Luna's parents and what they do. And, we get to see them interact in spooky ways. And we learn more about them. We learn more about them in this than we ever do. That every information that's a bit extracurricular we know is from this. Because in other times it's just the Hex Girls, they're singing, they're back, they're doing cool stuff, and they're still good things. They have good appearances, but this is the only one where I think they're characterized and they're not just cameoized. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if that would have been different for Haunted High Rise. I suspect so, but right here, right now, I think this is maybe the only ones where they're more characters than they are icons.
I mean, I do have one more question, and then we'll get on to Dan's thoughts on the Hex Girls as well. But obviously, we don't really see returning Scooby characters. They are like an anomaly. Did we ever find out why?
What do you mean?
Like, I know we've done interviews and we've tried to get more information out as much as possible, but at what point was it decided the Hex Girls are going to return in? Is the next one Legend of the Vampire?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. I can't remember if what's new episode came out around that time or not. I'm not sure.
But do we know why? What it is that was like?
It must have I want to say
coming
mass
back.
popularity, but then because I'm not of the age where I don't know if there was some forum that was around back then or some dial-up internet web page that was on there. I don't know any of that
Not
stuff.
for kids.
So I don't know if one of us was like, oh, on this section of this Telegram net there was something about the Hex Girls. People liked them. But there must have been something.
Yeah.
Maybe it was and it must have been an executive, right? That went, these gals worked well before, let's bring them back. Or this is a music-based one. Hey, why not bring these back? I don't know. Because the Hex Girls would have been thought of after the plot line of Music of the Vampire, I'm assuming. And so they would have had discussions of, we're going to have a whole rock band musical-based episode. I think naturally it would have gone, hey, we've got these characters lying around, let's do something with them. I don't know. I don't think we ever get
Quite possibly, but I think we can just be grateful that they did come back, and it sets it up for them to just keep coming back, and hopefully we get to see them again soon. Dan, what's your thoughts on how the Hex Girls are introduced and just them in general?
I love the Hex Girls. I think they were introduced. I thought it was great. I love the fact that Shaggy and Scooby automatically assume they were witches. Then obviously we find out they're not, but then obviously Daphne and Fred see Thorn and begin to suspect her. I thought that was really cool, and I really liked how they were able to connect them to the plot with obviously Thorn's dad being behind the witch's ghost initially. I thought that was really cool, and I love the fact that they keep on coming back. The sort of, I know, I forget where I heard it from, but someone once said, "Oh, the Ascend canon, like they just exist within the Scoobyverse," and I think it helps. Obviously, I think every time this Hex Girls have come back, very vague about how they know the gang. It's just, oh yeah, these are our friends that we know, but they don't obviously say the witch's ghost, because sometimes some iterations the ghosts aren't real. So I think that's really clever. And I don't know, it's interesting to think about how they knew they'd be so popular, because like I say, I don't think back when this movie premiered in 1999, I doubt there was, obviously we didn't have social media. Whereas what's been really fun, obviously, was back when I was younger, I always loved them. It's sort of seeing how much they're loved on Twitter. Like even at the beginning of October, I saw people tweet the music, their intro music from this film, saying this is their month. And that's obviously not amongst the Scooby fans, it's just amongst the general public. Like the general public love this era of Scooby Doo, and the Hex Girls are a big part of that for them. Like a lot of people, I imagine on Halloween, a lot of people will be tweeting about the Hex Girls.
Definitely. I think, like you say, it's just something that when you think of Scooby and Halloween, you go back to this. And I mean, it's kind of ruining one of the questions I was going to ask at the end of we've now rewatched 5. What's your definitive Scooby Doo Halloween movie? And I think the Hex Girls are probably a big reason why when I ask that question, I'm going to end up saying that this one's mine, because they're just brilliant. They really are. They're incredible. And it's why I like Legend of the Vampire so much, even if they're not integral to the story. It's the Hex Girls, and I don't think there's ever going to be any kind of doubt surrounding them. Just after we were introduced to them as well, we get introduced to the first iteration of the Witch of Sarah Ravencroft, and I like how they do this. I think this style works really well in trying to like paint it out as, oh yeah, this is the villain witch version. And I like that there's enough distinction between this one and when we see her later as well. But at the same time, you can kind of work out some of the similarities. I just think how this was animated was really cleverly done. Sophie, whenever there's anything art related, I'd like to go to you first. So what do you think on how we see kind of this first iteration of Sarah Ravencroft?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the autumn vibes again, like the trees and all. Like you say, it's very distinctive from, you know, the man in the mask and then the actual like living Sarah, like in the end of the movie. You can tell that it doesn't look as real as like when we see her later on. I think they also, the colouring, like the bright green, like that's really like a stark colour to like pop out at you. And I just something about it. I mean, I love like, you know, the I Met the Ghost of Oak Avon t-shirt. Like I love that t-shirt. I even got one from like Redbubble. Like I wear it every Halloween. It's like such
I
a
love
good,
that.
like, vibe. It's brilliant.
Oh, that's amazing. I should 100% get you one of those t-shirts, JayBee. That's so good. It will. JayBee, what do you think of the Ghost of Sarah Ravencroft?
I mean, this is just fantastic, really, because I've spoken a bit about the subversion of expectations here. And I think what this does is actually the opposite. It's the affirmation of expectations. Because at this point, at least me personally, I felt sorry for Ben Ravencroft's ancestor. I was a bit like, oh, clearly you've kind of you've drawn the shorter straw here. Like, you were a clever woman and now you're a witch. But when this comes up, it looks so good. And maybe this is a hot take. A part of me actually prefers this design than the real one. I don't know if it just seems more like Haggard and classic Halloweeny to me, but I do like the other one. But with this, it looks so Haggard and so Halloweeny that instantly you're either thinking one of two things. One, oh wow, that's scary. I guess it was true. Maybe a kid would be thinking that, or someone like me. Or two, well, that looks completely ridiculous and over the top. The cackling is generic and they're throwing fire bombs. And either way you look at it, it's that affirmation. It's like, oh, so it was fake. That makes sense why it was so over the top and cartoony. Like, so I just think it works on every level because we get such a classic witch villain in this movie doing witchy things, but then it's like a double whammy of, so that isn't it. So I absolutely love it. It's like best of both worlds. So yeah, it's again another S tier moment.
To me, it's like some odd reverse psychology from seeing them look this way. I was more convinced that she was going to turn out to be innocent, and I don't know why. Dan, what was your thoughts on the initial Sarah Ravencroft ghost?
Yeah, I really liked the design and everything. I think they did a good job, like you said. She's not a million miles away from sort of how the real Sarah Ravencroft looks, but she's very noticeably more cartoony. Like she's green. They give her the stereotypical like witch's hat, and I don't know. I think I always remember this version of her. Like when we said we were going to do this review, I had stuck in my head just the part where she just keeps on saying, "This town will pay for what it did to me," and it always makes me laugh. It's the same as when the original Witch is Witch in Scooby Doo Where Are You, where that also turned out to be a man in disguise. All I could think of was, wow, Mr. McKnight was really going all out with this, with his cackle and everything. It always makes me laugh when I just think about how much that went into that. But then I think maybe that's where Thorn got her sort of creative side from. Maybe her dad's really into witches and stuff.
quite possibly. And it's following this scene that we do go back to the Hex Girls and get to see them sing for the first time. And I believe the first song they sing is the "I'm Gonna Cast a Spell on You" one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do we also get what's the other? Do we get a second song at the end of this movie?
Yeah, I think it ends with the Earth,
Yeah.
When
yeah.
Yeah, I do think this movie is kind of where the Hex Girl music peaks. I don't think it gets better than this at any stage. I know, and kind of promoting one of our interviews here, when we spoke with Jennifer Hale, the voice of Thorn, she did say that there is another song that has her favourite. But for me, I don't think Hex Girl music gets better than this. Quickly going around, JayBee, do you have a favourite song from this movie, or is your favourite one outside of this movie?
Oh, see, I wanna say my favorite one's just the I'm a Hex Girl one because that's the one that I associate more with them. There's a couple that I do like that are beyond this. Like I really like that music battle sequence that they had in Mystery Incorporated. That to me, it reminded me of the sequence from Scott Pilgrim, so that like resonated with me on both levels. I like the one Jennifer Hale sang because you can source those all the Witches Ghost songs that made it onto the fourth album on YouTube. There's so many there that I think are just so underrated. And I guess we can say this now because enough time's passed. But there was one from Haunted High Rise that I absolutely love. That is still stuck in my head. Why are you looking at me like you're
I
terrified?
just didn't know we were saying that, but okay.
Well, Leah, we're about to retire, so we can say anything. You know what I
Okay.
mean?
Well, in that case, I have to agree with JayBee. There was one that is just as good as these that was meant to be in Haunted High Rise. But moving on from that, I think I do think it's fair to say though that from the first time we hear them sing in this movie, to me that's what solidified that they could be a permanent feature in Scooby Doo. It was exceptional. Sophie, do you have a favorite Hex Girl song that may or may not be in this movie? And what's your thoughts on just, I know, this moment, and if it was as impactful for you as it perhaps was for us?
I know it's like the first encounter of the Hex Girls, but it's definitely the peak of like their appearances on the Scooby franchise. The lighting, the music, everything is just like spot on. I think like JayBee, as soon as I think about the Hex Girls, I'd be like, I'm a Hex Girl. But if I go and sing a song in my head, it's gonna be I'm gonna cast a spell on you. That's always the song that goes to me first. But like you said, yeah, the cancelled song. Sorry, what was it? A Haunted High Rise. Oh my gosh, I'm on a holiday haunt at the moment. But yeah, that was a banging tune. That's all I'm gonna say about that.
I still find myself singing that one more than these two.
Either hoodoo, voodoo, you do voodoo. Oh,
I was never a massive fan of that.
they need to go on tour, really. We need a whole Hex Girls album. Like we recently got the Trick or Treat soundtrack. We need a Hex Girls soundtrack
Anything's
now.
possible.
I want one.
Dan, how about you? Do you have a favourite Hex Girl song? And any thoughts on this when we first hear them singing the Scooby franchise?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with everyone here. I do think the songs they sing here are so iconic. They definitely peaked here. I'd say I'm a Hex Girls probably my favorite. I think it's just so catchy, so iconic. Although I remember that song battle in Mystery Incorporated, I remember finding that really catchy. But honestly, it still amazes me that we interviewed Jennifer Hale, that she sang for us. And I just think whenever you hear her singing as Thorn, it is just so iconic, and it just shows just how talented she is, really.
Yeah, I want to interview her again. I actually think it's completely crazy that I agree. I think it's crazy we did that. That's like fever dream. And I always try.
That was one of sorry,
No, I always get so self-congratulatory because I never used to be like this, but I get so self-congratulatory that I wanted Neil Fanning for interview 100, right? But it had to be pushed so forward because I had to promote the Australian Comic Con, right? And then I was like, oh, I guess we can just put something else out for interview 100 and say, oh, well, Neil Fanning was special this season, I guess. But no, we couldn't do that. We got a banger, and it was a Hex Girl, the Hex Girl, and that was interview 100. Like, oh, you don't get much more on fire than that. I can't wait for the SAG strikes to end because I'm gonna go wild with who we're gonna get on for season 3. It's gonna be nuts. It's like the season 3, the final one is gonna end with a bang. I'm really excited.
well, Jennifer Hill was one of the ones as well where like JayBee had asked me if I could choose who he could get on, who would I want, and you managed to tick the box.
Yeah.
It was really good. Okay, so after we've heard the Hex Girls sing, and I think there's some fun interactions surrounding that as well. Like Fred's really involved in dancing and stuff, and Daphne's a bit like, calm down. And
Yeah, both Shaggy and Fred get the hots for the Hex Girls. Like, just deep that for a second. Those two have the same type in one element. It's goth chicks. But yeah, Fred's just, he's
not
kind of
everyone have the
vibing.
same type.
Have they had the same type before?
There's a one Shaggy and Daphne scene in Mystery Incorporated.
I know, but it's like Daphne, that's like 95% of people's type, isn't it? You know what I mean?
Anyway, moving on, because you've already gone over Thorn and Daphne and
I've not
everything.
gone over
so
Thorn, let's be very clear about that.
Make a comment about Thorn, but we'll move on from this. So at this point they split up and kind of follow all the suspects. I do think it's always, like we say, it was interesting that one of them was Thorn because we learned a bit more about her, but also this is kind of where we find out that she's a Wiccan, so it puts a bit more kind of, I don't know, a little bit more suspicion on her, but also the mayor, and we just kind of see the Velma and well, I can't remember his name.
Oh, and
Ben
the mayor
Ravencroft
is
dynamic.
Neil Ross. That was an interview we did. That was a fun one. All in the description below.
And all this kind of serves to do is it reunites basically all the gang back together again to see the witch and to get an unmasking, which it turns out to be Thorn's dad. So at this point, I feel like it was pretty nice. This is where we'd normally see the conclusion of the movie. We've got a good mystery, a good unmasking, and we'd normally be quite happy and be able to leave it there.
I always find what the mayor does so funny because it's so goofy.
But
when like all the town gets unmasked, and the mayor just comes out saying, "Well, I for one am absolutely flabbergasted with this act of treachery," and Velma's like, "Not so fast, mayor, because you were the one." Like, it was just...
see, this is just one of the ones where you really like Velma. That's funny. That's a good Velma moment.
I love BJ Ward. I think I like BJ Ward, and there's some Velma voices that just hearing them make me feel warm. And one of them is BJ Ward, and the other one's like Mindy Cohn. And I don't know. Like, I don't like in hindsight, I'm not listening to her and thinking that objectively sounds like Velma, but I'm listening to it and go, that's how Velma sounded when I was a child. So, yeah, it's just fantastic stuff.
This is where we get the reverse mystery map as well, because with mystery map, when you think it's finished and then they give you more, you're like, oh gosh, no.
No.
Whereas with this one, you think it's done and you get more and it's even better. It just continues getting better. So the mayor kind of goes to tell Ben Ravencroft that they actually did find a little bit more on Sarah Ravencroft when they were unearthing the site. And Velma asks Scooby to take them back to where he found the buckle. I've got one slight issue with this, and that is when Scooby digs up the chest with the book in it, the book doesn't look like it did in the picture that she used to identify the buckle to the book. So it's like, if the book didn't look like it did in the picture, then it didn't have the buckle on it that Scooby found. But that's possibly me nitpicking completely. Did that cross any of your minds, or is it just me?
I'm just scared. I think my hiccups have come back.
Oh no.
But the buckle I didn't think about too much, to be honest, but I'm not such an observant person, I admit.
I don't know. I think it was a good reveal. I think the second they dig that book up, you know that like it explained everything. You're like, oh my gosh, she is the witch, and this is about to get real. And for me, this part of the movie is just so exciting because I think before anybody has chance to process that she's a witch, Ben Ravencroft's reading the spell from the book, and she appears. And I think, like we were saying before, that art style and the way it was done, you got such a good contrast between the two because she still looks terrifying, but it's also clear enough to know this is real. Like, this doesn't have a green silhouette or anything like that. This is definitively there. So, Dan, I guess you first. What was your thoughts on how they revealed she was a witch and what she looked like?
Yeah, I think this film really works because even though obviously you think once the unmasking's done, it finishes, like you say, it doesn't feel like a slog. You don't think, oh God, there's more to go. Like, it does a good job of sort of keeping you interested. I've always loved that scene in between where they're in Ben's office and they're just like talking to the Hex Girls. And the Hex Girls are just sort of explaining everything. I've always loved that scene. I've never thought about the buckle in the book issue. It's possible that when Sarah had that painted, they just sort of asked for the skull not to be on it. I don't know. And in terms of when we were saying there's a more likable Velma in this one, like earlier when they go to split up and she sort of teases Fred, she's like, why do you always have to split up with Daphne? I think Velma is more likable, and I think in this film, and that works because immediately when she, it's revealed that Ben's evil, you just feel like she's not, the type of Velma where you think, oh well, you shouldn't have been, you shouldn't have been so annoying. You genuinely feel bad for her, and I absolutely love just how fast Ben turns. Like as soon as they dig it up, and as soon as he has the book, he literally just turns away. And then when Velma's like, "Oh, that doesn't look like a, like a medicine book," he's like, "Oh, it's because it isn't." Like he just literally just does not care after that point. He's got what he wants.
Just 'cause it is. I
I just love it. I just think that's so it's so funny because he doesn't even try to pretend. He just goes straight into it. He's like, right, I've got that
The
one.
swagger of Tim Curry as well sells that as
That's
well.
the thing. It's a combination of a few things. It's great acting because his voice changes straight away, animated perfectly because his eyes take on an entirely new look. You can see that evil streak is there. I know, like you say, I think it just flips so quickly. And then what's your thoughts on once Sarah appears, how she looks?
Oh, I love it. I love how she looks. I love how they didn't go for like the stereotypical witches look, but she still looks evil. And especially when she first appears, and yet you see like the cheekbones and everything. I think she looks fantastic. And the hair it looks like it's underwater almost, like it's wavy. I love it. I think it's an excellent introduction, and you genuinely feel scared. It's genuinely like a oh no sort of moment. I think
Yes.
it's fantastic without obviously being too scary because it's aimed for kids. It gets the idea down straight away, like oh no, like Ben Ravencroft might be bad, but this is an even bigger bad.
See, I know as a kid, like this was kind of where my fear level liked to reach. This was like the exciting, oh gosh, this is scary. Any more and it would have flipped that switch over into, okay, I'm actually slightly terrified of this, but I've got to say, I think it's pretty perfect. Sophie, how do you feel about how they kind of announced that Sarah Ravencroft was a witch and also the aesthetics of it?
I think the masking of the first witch was like a classic Scooby Doo, and we were kind of like content with the ending. I think like it made for a good movie, and then you're like a downward spiral to like the end, and then like bam, like here you go, we're not over yet. And like you say, you're not like, oh god, here we go again. Like you actually really invest in the story. And then like we said, like Tim Curry's performance as Ben, like as soon as he gets the book and there's like character change, it's like there you go. It's like oh my gosh. And like Dan said, the witch, like Sarah's not like a stereotypical witch, which kind of makes her look more real, and that kind of be a bit more scary. And yeah, it's brilliant, isn't it? It's like such an awesome scene.
It is. You can kind of feel your heartbeat picking up when you watch it. You are really invested, and I think, like you say, they animated it well because she is a witch, and like they could have made this really goofy and kind of just animated her to have a witch's hat on and she comes out with a broomstick and all this kind of stuff, but they made it real. Like you knew how real this was. This wasn't a gimmick. This wasn't meant to be funny. This was meant to be serious, and they just did it so well. JayBee, what did you think?
The only thing I'm missing is a little bit of an edge. Like there's scenes from something like a Zombie Island that I remember impact me on a different level. And what I'm thinking of is the flashback when the pirates go and they like pillage Moonscar Island with Simone and all that's still on there. And I think what would have worked absolutely fantastically here is just some of the flashbacks that maybe everything that Ben said wasn't entirely a fabrication as such. Like we did have a more innocent side to Sarah Ravencroft here, but I think just one of those flashback type sequences of the village maybe turning on her, trying all the like the witch trials, and it's actually kind of interesting that Dan compared the flow of Sarah Ravencroft's hair to like being in water. I think it would have been kind of morbid but cool to have one of those flashbacks be that old drowning trial there, and then she like almost transforms into that more watery type thing. Like she had the trial by water, and that's why she's got a bit more of a fluid motion about her. I think that would have been pretty cool. Maybe a bit too dark, but I think again you could say the same thing about that scene in Zombie Island because that has some pretty dark implications. But other than a bit of backstory that would have added a bit of a kick to it for me, again, I think this was this was amazing. And I forget who does the voice for Sarah Ravencroft here. I think it's Tress McNeil, maybe. But I think again that is a perfect blend between stereotypical witch, but also not. And there's funny sequences, and that's what I appreciate. Like, this is just absolutely perfect.
Yeah, I'd agree. Perfect. The word I'd use. And I do think one thing that's interesting as well is the character development for Ben Ravencroft, because like you said, you get him as this person that Velma can really relate to, that's nice. You see that switch flip in seconds. But I also like the character development that follows that, where he kind of didn't realize how bad this was going to be. And in a way, you almost, I don't know, I started to feel sorry for him by the end of it, because he kind of wanted to be reunited with his family member that probably knew she was a witch and everything. He didn't realize how bad this was going to get.
You F around, find out, you want to live by fire, you die by fire.
Yeah, but he didn't have any, I don't think he had a clue how bad she was going to be. And she was pretty terrible. But it was also fun at the same time. Like, for all the threat level was there, like how she kind of grew the pumpkins up and everything that. And it was just really good. And in a way, it kind of almost reminded me of the scene in Monsters Unleashed where they're having to throw that circular dial thing, like when they're trying to keep the spell book away. There's a moment in this that I almost can directly relate to Monsters Unleashed. I think that this was quite kind of a pivotal moment, but I also think it kind of cements why the Hex Girls are such a permanent feature as well, because quite often you see the gang get that moment at the end, that they get the unmasking, they get the recognition. Whereas here, all of the resolution was passed over to one of the Hex Girls. So Thorn gets to do the spell. She's the one that saves the day. And I almost think that that's part of the reason that it does kind of solidify them as quite integral people in the Scoobyverse. JayBee, what's your thoughts on everything from, like we say, seeing Sarah Ravencroft, so all the kind of magic that happens and ultimately Thorn's spell that gets her back in the book?
I think the parts that are a bit freaky, I've kind of said everything that I needed to say about them, because that's what you kind of go to. And my opinions on those remain relatively unchanged. I love all those pumpkins coming to life, and I think they're even more elevated by the art style of the time and the fact that they didn't just look like what we saw in Happy Halloween, which I did like, but it wasn't monster pumpkins. It was quite literally a twisted versions of pumpkins that you or I could make along the Halloween season. I just think it was a lot grittier. But what always impresses me at this point now is you can have something be so scary and so threatening, and yet there is time for the Scooby Doo jokes that you'd expect, like Shaggy trying to throw the bucket of water onto Sarah Ravencroft, and just the way she looks, just so unimpressed, and she's like, "What was that?" And it just makes me miss this era. Like, I know nowadays they want Scooby Doo to be super child friendly, and I think there's definitely reasons for that. I definitely don't want to see all Scooby become horror or slasher or anything like that. Like, that's not the direction I want the whole franchise to go. But this just shows that we can have an edge, but also maintain the Scooby Doo comedy. And I've spoken for ages on loads of podcasts, loads of reviews about the scariness of this. But I think for this time, what impressed me the most is the humor of this last act, actually. So yeah, I just think it's unapologetically Scooby, and I love that for it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it goes through the widest range of emotions of any Scooby in this sequence, because you're terrified at the start of it, you're laughing in the middle of it, but also I feel like a big sense of empowerment at the end of it. Like the last line of Thorn's spell, I think it's "which you return to which you've come" or something, that is fully ingrained in my brain as like a massive moment, and I don't have a clue why, but it just really was. I think there is just such a good range of emotions, and you're invested enough that you go on that entire roller coaster with them. Sophie, how do you feel from, like we said, all the kind of spells, the comedy leading back up to getting Sarah back in the book?
Yeah, there's a real balance in the sequence, from like real scariness to like all the comedy. I think the fact that Sarah can like turn anything at her hand to be like really dangerous towards the gang, especially when like the fire comes out. And then the pumpkins are like iconic, and that kind of roots back like the Halloween theme as well, even though it's just meant to be an autumn movie. Um, yeah, I remember like the beginning, I was like, oh my god, like this is actually really scary. And then like, the big turkey scene and like all that. There's so many funny elements in it, and it's like such a perfect balance and blend of the two of them. Um, I just think how the sequence like carried out was just such a powerful like movie moment. You could easily I kind of forgot that there was like a first witch to begin with, sort of thing. Like this was it, that this is like the end of the movie. And I think for you to kind of completely forget about what's happened before and just focus on this moment, it was really powerful.
Yeah. I think, like you say, you almost from as soon as the witch is out of the book, or even from them finding the chest, you forget you've just sat and watched an entire movie. You're ready to sit and watch the second one. It's almost like the two are entirely different things. Dan, how did you feel about this part of the movie?
Yeah, I love this part of the movie. Like you say, it doesn't feel like just an add-on. Like it feels that you're so invested. I love how obviously even when Ben turns evil and he's like at first he's really menacing. Like when he puts that ring of fire around the gang, I always got a bit creeped out at that. But then, like you say, it just blows up in his face when he thinks him and Sarah are going to rule together, and she's just like, no. And I think what really sells it is Tim Curry and Tress MacNeille, because I think they just go for it. Like they absolutely like the sort of sparring match between them, I think is fantastic. And I think they really sell this sort of like two evil people trying to get the upper hand on each other. And I think they do a good job, like Sophie said, with sort of like the pumpkins, that sort of adds like a Halloweeny feel to it. And it's also funny when you mentioned about them throwing the book to each other, and it's similar to the scene in Monsters Unleashed. I've noticed as well, it's also a similar thing happens. I think it's in the finale to Mystery Incorporated, when they're battling the entity, they have to, is it a spear or something? They're all thrown to each other at the end. And I love those type of scenes because I think it just shows that the gang do need each other, and it's sort of everyone has a little bit of a part to play. So it's not just Shaggy and Scooby getting the book. They then have to throw it to Daphne, who then has to throw it to Fred, who then has to throw it to Velma. And like you said, the bit with Thorn banishing her back, that again always stuck out to me, just the way Jennifer Hale delivers that line. And then literally Sarah grabs the book, so it's literally the final seconds, and then she just gets flung back. And obviously Ben's ultimate fate, which is quite creepy, where he gets pulled into the book. I always thought that was quite dark, just when you just see Sarah dragging him in, and then the book gets set on fire. I thought that was so dark.
Yeah, it certainly was. You kind of didn't imagine this character that was living and human and a popular writer at the start of the books, like their fate's going to be they just disappear. No more books be written by them and stuff. It's a bit creepy when you think about it. But ultimately, I think the movie gets its happy resolution. Like it's not even like all of a sudden there's no tourist element. They get to keep the big turkey and everything. It just resolves really nicely, and then we finish it off with a Hex Girls song, right?
Yeah, we got that.
Earth, Wind, Fire, and Air plays at the end, I think. So, JayBee, you look like you need to wake up. So we're gonna start with
What do you
you.
mean you need to wake up?
For you, is this movie a smash or a pass?
This is definitely a pass. I did not enjoy it. No, I don't know. This is a super smash. Like, I know that I've been a bit out of gas for this review. I'm wondering if I've got some internalized ego thing where reviewing this movie wasn't my idea, so I'm a bit checked out of it. I don't know if I'm just an awful person or if it was the coma I've eaten myself into today. But yeah, I have been a bit out of gas in this one. But just if we were discussing a movie that I wasn't fully into, I actually probably would have fallen asleep just because I'm so out of it. But the love that I've got speaking to you guys and discussing the movie and the Hex Girls as well, which is completely amazing. Like, it's completely revived me in a way that I can't describe. So this is definitely a big smash. I want to watch this every day, every Halloween. I mean, the stuff that I can criticize about it isn't even about what's in the movie. It's just, oh, maybe they could have done this or could have done that. But everything that they've presented, I like all of it. So yeah, big smash. What about you, Millie?
I don't think I'll ever see this movie as anything but a huge smash. It's amazing. It's like S tier Scooby. 100% in my top 3, and I don't think anything will ever come along that takes its place in the top 3. It's perfect in many ways, from the Hex Girls to the story to how invested you feel watching it. There's a particular era of Scooby, and I think we all know when that was, where like it's easy to disengage and to want to pick your phone up and to not be fully invested. Whereas this movie, you feel every bit of emotion that is happening on the screen in front of you. And no matter how many times I've watched it, that doesn't ever change. It's the first Scooby movie I ever watched, and it's the one that I'll definitely have watched the most times. Like, absolutely love it. I think this is possibly the first Scooby thing I ever saw, and the reason that I like it so much. So, massive smash, and I owe a lot to this movie. So, next we're moving on to Dan. For you, is this movie a smash or a pass?
Oh, it is definitely a smash. I think there's certain, if you're a Scooby Doo fan, there's just certain things you have to have watched. I think you have to have watched Where Are You? You have to have watched the first live action. You have to have watched Zombie Island, and you have to have watched this. It's just so iconic. I think obviously it's the introduction of the Hex Girls. Yeah, I think as well it does such a good job. I think it's easy to obviously miss out in hindsight, but Zombie Island brought the franchise back in such a big way. You'd think, oh, the only way is down, but it didn't. It continues on. It's such a strong entry, and it just proved that, Zombie Island wasn't a one-off. This was definitely a franchise that you could bring out even just the next year, and it was still a viable option. So yeah, 100% a smash.
I like what you said there as well. I think on the back of Zombie Island, you had to do something big. Otherwise, it was going to be a step down.
Yeah, it reminds
And
me
that
of like the
was,
revival for Doctor Who, isn't it? Like it mirrors it. Like for like say Christopher Eccleston
Yeah.
proved the concept, David Tennant proved that it could continue.
yeah.
And that's a lovely way to look at that.
And I think for me, it was one of my fears with Trick or Treat. For me, Trick or Treat was on that level of Zombie Island where it was such a high. You were going to be worried about what came off the back of it. And when I found out that Crypto was the movie off the back of it, it was a big kind of, oh no, not this again sort of thing. So yeah, to step up after Zombie Island just makes this movie have even more credit than it did already. And Sophie, what about you? Is Witch's Ghost a smash or a pass?
Definitely a smash. I mean, not only is it iconic, like a cult classic, but just the execution, it's such a perfect all-round Scooby movie. Such an original story. The artwork's like beautiful in it. Definitely riding the high wave of Zombie Island, like the two of them together, just perfection. I know so many people love the two movies, and for this one particularly, it's such a good Halloween, like autumny watch, which is always the first one to hand that I'll be watching. And yeah, it's just a brilliant movie.
Okay, perfect. So we've all agreed. And before we wrap things up, we've reviewed 5 movies together now. So I want to know, with it being Halloween, which is your most kind of biggest go-to Scooby Doo Halloween movie? Is it one we've reviewed, one we haven't? I'm going to kick it off by saying mine is Witch's Ghost. 100%. This is going to be the first movie that I add into the jar every year for Halloween movies to watch. JayBee, what about you?
I don't know. I think out of the ones we've reviewed and all of
Doesn't
that
have to be the ones we've reviewed. It can be any Scooby movie. Your go-to Halloween.
I think I'm just gonna be a basic JB here and just say the 2002 live action movie. Like, I just can't stay away from it. I don't know what it is, like, but it's just my weak point and it's spooky. So I do like that. I must say that my overall list might surprise some people because I think I like Witch's Ghost better than a lot of the others that we've reviewed. But at this stage of my life now, I think I just like stuff that is a bit more fluffy that I can watch easier. So yeah, if say Witch's Ghost wasn't available and I needed to watch, say, a Goblin King or a Trick or Treat, I wouldn't be depressed at that at all. I just think it's different movies for different moods. So I think they're all good.
I mean, I would say that the 2 movies you've mentioned there, Witch's Ghost and Trick or Treat, both make it into my top 3. They're Halloween just seems to be the time for Scooby. They
What
do
about
so many
Goblin
things
King?
so right. Goblin King's not quite there. But we'll save that conversation for a different time. Move on to Sophie. What is your go-to Halloween movie from Scooby Doo?
I think for me personally, it depends how I feel. Do I want a more jokey, child-friendly one, or like a real dark one? I think kid-friendly wise, it's got to be Goblin King for me. Like that's such like a classic Halloween movie for me. However, the more dark, edgier tones that 9 out of 10 times I'll pick would have to be Witch's Ghost.
Okay, perfect. And Dan, how about you? Do you have a top go-to Scooby Halloween movie?
Yeah, I do. So one I always watch on Halloween, and is one of my favorite pieces of Scooby-Doo content ever is Scooby-Doo and the Spooky Scarecrow. I
Mm.
absolutely love that one. I think it's so Halloweeny. I love Cornfield Clem. I think it just works for me. I will be watching that on Halloween, and I'll probably, because I won't probably want to watch obviously like a movie as well. I'd probably watch the Scooby-Doo, the What's New Halloween, and maybe even Halloween Hassle in Dracula's Castle, just to be a little different. But yeah, Spooky Scarecrow is my number one.
It's interesting. The Spooky Scarecrow was initially going to be on the schedule for this month, but the writer got back and said that he had an experience with a podcast recently and they were just awful. So he was taking a break from them, but like, feel free to contact me a bit later. And I'm kind of like, okay, I will. But it's like, you wrote one piece of Scooby Doo thing, and it was a Halloween one. You kind of need to be here in October, or what's the point? But we'll see if we can circle back to that. But yeah, I agree. Like, I love that one. What about you? Have you got any tea to spill?
No, I said mine was Witch's
No, but
Ghost.
like, have you got any drama, any gossip that you can share
My
with the
drama was
class?
with you. I didn't know you were going to be talking about the song from Haunted High Rise in this review, but
Well, just you know what I mean. Like, since we're getting close to retiring, I can say any number of things. But yeah, I love this one, and I love doing this. And this is kind of like a finale because this is the last time I'm going to be wearing this for a video, and I've been wearing this every video in October. And I actually haven't watched it once. Like I've only worn it for the duration of the recordings, just to be clear. But I've not watched the thing once. So
okay, so
yeah, I'm
this
hanging it
is
up.
the last Halloween video for JayBee in that hoodie, but it isn't the last review video because JayBee was outvoted, and we
Oh,
are gonna review
but we need
more.
new chairs before we do, because my back's been killing me with these
That's your
chairs.
own
Like,
fault.
this is the worst chair I've ever seen,
It's your own
and
fault.
yeah, you know what I mean. But yeah, so for people watching that are fans of Witch's Ghost, we've got Jennifer Hale, we've got the writers Rick Kopp and David Goodman, who I'd love to see write for the Hex Girls again one day. We've got Neil Ross, who was the voice of the mayor. We've interviewed James Tim Walker, who worked on the animation of this. Let me think, have we interviewed anyone else? I don't know, but I'd like to find out. So yeah, I'll make a Scooby Doo and the Witch's Ghost playlist that'll be linked in the description down below. I guess to get in the process of wrapping things up, Sophie, where can people find you on the Tinternet, on the World Wide Web, the WWW?
Yep, you can find me on Instagram at Scooby for Life.
Oh, and of course, Dan, when people are surfing the net, where can they wash up on your shores?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram, both at DanFaz94.
That is absolutely incredible. As for us, you can find our link tree in the description down below, which will have all of our links, including our spicy content. Make sure to check that out.